for asking me to be here to speak tonight, Julie, share my experience, strength, and hope. I got sober on April the 20th of '05, and I'd like to say I had a lot of great ideas in doing that and a big hand in that, but it wasn't. As I look around tonight, some of these folks over here are the ones that helped me get sober, and along the way have helped me stay sober. A lot of these guys on this side, same thing. I grew up in Sherrall, South Carolina, not far from here. And my mom and dad, they drank every day. Every day. I don't remember days that they didn't drink. My dad, he was a Wake Forest graduate. My mom was an 8th grade dropout. I guess they say opposites attract, so whatever. But I know they like to drink. They drank Canadian Mist. I remember what the bottle looked like. And I remember a lot of people being in our house on Friday nights. And if it wasn't there, we'd go to other places. It seemed like there were 3 or 4 places we would go to. And, you know, a lot of my life today is molded by what happened when I was a kid. Alcoholics Anonymous has allowed me to work through some of those things, whether it be anger, insecurities, whatever it is. I'm definitely defected. I know that. And people that know me know that. And that's the good thing about AA is, for me, is having fun with who I am. You know, because for a long time I walked around with all these things inside of me or who I was, and I just didn't measure up. Wasn't good enough. I'm not saying that's not true today and it doesn't go through my mind, but it's not as much. And what I believe today, I don't care if you're in AA or not, everybody's got problems. You know, or they got stuff. And I don't care who it is. Everybody's got something. And but as a kid growing up, I went to a counselor for about a year ago, and she said, were you ever abandoned? And I'm like, no. I said, my mom and dad were in the house the whole time. She said, did your mom and dad, like, when you were a kid, did your dad sit down and play building blocks with you or trains or whatever? I'm like, no. Yeah. She said, well, did like you come through the door, get off the school bus, did your parents come up and hug you? Kiss you on the forehead, tell you they love you, take your coat off? I'm like, no. She said, well, did they ever read you stories at nighttime in the bed? And I'm like, no. She said, Frank, that's called emotional abandonment. And see, I need things like that to kind of understand why I am who I am. You know, I think it's more important to get a grasp on things to do, mainly prayer, talking about things, the tools that AA has given me to stay sober, and getting connected to people like myself, you know, so I can open up. You know, I'm probably not going to go across to my neighbor and open up like I am to, say, Chad and AA or anyone else. But as a kid growing up, there was a lot of violence and insecurities, extreme insecurities, a lot of fear. I remember one time I was in school and I got hit in the mouth with a baseball bat. It was in the early 70s, we were playing. That's when the aluminum bats had just came out. Kid was in the practice box swinging there, and I bent down and picked the bat up. I shouldn't have been there, and he hit me. He just came through, pow, hit me in the mouth. And so they took me to the infirmary, and they said, your dad's on the way. I'm like, oh, shit. Because it was embarrassing. I knew he was going to come there drunk. Come through the door, you know, I'm like, no. I mean, it's bad enough at home, and the neighbors know, but damn, at school now, you know, so I ran out the door. I stood on the, I'll never forget it. I stood there, and they said, no, come on back in. I said, oh, no. Like, they weren't going to get me back in, you know, because I didn't know what to expect, and I was embarrassed. And so when he pulled up, I ran, got in the car, and we took off. And so, you know, those are just a lot of things that occurred. I remember I would go to my neighbor's house, Todd Lomas, a good friend of mine, my best friend growing up, and they lived about, I don't know, 30, 40 yards away from us, maybe 50, but their house was different. Like, you take your shoes off when you walk in. Their grass was cut. Just a whole different, like, environment, you know. And I remember going in there, and first damn thing you do, you take your shoes off, because his mom kept the floor nice. Anyway, kept them damn floors nice. And so you walk around her damn house with no damn shoes on. And but it was the hardest thing to get up and walk out, to say goodbye. I don't know why. But anyway, we stayed there for 10 years, and during that time, just repeated the same thing over and over. I mean, I think it's important for me to identify myself in Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, not stay drunk and miserable for the whole talk. That's just for me. So we moved. We stayed there 10 years. We moved down to Summerville, South Carolina. Stayed there a couple of years, and then we moved to Wilmington, and moved there in '77. I graduated high school in 1980 at E.A. Laney High School. In '78, the summer of '78, my parents moved away. They moved to Eatonton, North Carolina, and I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go, and I knew how to work them. You know, I knew what to say, how rude to say it, how mean to say it, and so they got me an apartment, let me stay there by myself. And I went to high school the last 2 years, by my, on my own. And I mean, I did okay. I remember I met an old girl from Trenton, New Jersey, down at the beach. And back in the 70s, you didn't have the damn cell phones and all that. I mean, it was Southern Bell, and it cost a ton of money to talk on the phones. And boy, I was in love. My dad was getting phone bills $300-400 a month. Man, he was getting pissed. And but I didn't care. I wasn't paying. Just like the tires they bought on the cars, I'd burn them off. I didn't care about them. And I'll never forget one day, he called me up. He said, "Son, have you had any tickets?" I'm like, "Oh, no tickets, no." He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I'm positive." I mean, just pure liar. And I wasn't drinking or anything at this time. And so about 3 weeks later, he said, "Look, we got a little golf tournament up here. You want to come up and play so-and-so weekend?" I'm like, "Yeah." We went and played. And my dad, he was totally different than me. I mean, we were polar opposites. I mean, you set us side by side, there's no way you'd say they're father son. And you know, he's always calm about things. When it came to discussing things, he didn't show his ass. Some people don't have to cuss and rant and raise hell to get the point across, and he was one of those. And he said, it was on Saturday we played, and he said, I'll never forget it. He said, called me Frankie. He said, I was in another room. He said, "Frankie?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Would you step over in here a minute?" I went, So I went in there and sat down, and he said, "You remember I asked you about a month ago about them speeding tickets, right?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I ain't had none." He didn't say nothing. He kept pulling on them old Kents. He reached the old drawer, pulled out this long damn thing, about that long. He said, "Well, that's your driving record." He said, "You've had about 12 tickets in the last year and a half." And I had. And I didn't have a license, of course. And he said, and all he said, he said, real calm, he said, "I'm just disappointed in you." You know, and sometimes when people say things like that, that kind of hurts a lot worse than beating me down, you know. He said, "Just get your keys and give me your keys, park your car under the shed out there." I said, "Well, how am I going to get back to Wilmington?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "Hell," he said, "Get a bus, I guess. I don't know." And I did. It took a long time to get back down there. It took about 8 or 9 damn hours to ride that bus back down there. Because I ain't going to stay in Eatonton. There wasn't nothing there at all. But anyway, like I said, I stayed there in Wilmington, and I didn't start drinking till I was probably 19 years old. I didn't really care for it. I had a huge resentment against it. I mean, it devastated our family. And I'm sure I'm not going to sit here and tell you all the things that happened in our home, but I think we read it in the long version tonight, that some of us suffer from grave emotional mental disorders, and I definitely do. You know, there were things I saw when I was 7, 8 years old that I remember them right now as clear as they happened that day, and I'll never forget them. Never. Now, I can't hang my hat on that and just stay in the victim role forever. But there are just things that have happened in not just my lives, but other people's lives that, you know, it's just, it's scar. The scar, emotional scar. And there were other things that happened. But, you know, I guess the thing that stuck with me the most was, you know, our dysfunction, our inability to come together as a family. There were times it would happen at least once a year. But in Sherrall, when we lived there, we would go to Florence, South Carolina. I didn't know why we went to this hospital my mom was in. I had no clue. And later I would find out it's because she was having mental problems. you know, I guess all the abuse and drinking. I don't know. I just know she was in a mental ward there, and we would go. I mean, we went several times. I was like, they got damn hospitals in Sherrall. Why are we? Yeah, I never said it, but kind of went through my mind. I never really tried to get sober. When I started drinking wasn't the thing I really enjoyed doing. I hated it, as I said a while ago. But it was around 81. I started mixing substance salt with alcohol, and boy, I'll tell you, at that time it was fun. I could talk about things a little more better or clearer. I could smoke more cigarettes. You know, I don't know, it kind of broke the ice. It did something for me that I cannot explain. Euphoria. It was really good. So I thought. And I later would call that a false sense of security, because that's what would happen for me when I would start in on those bags and drinking a little bit along with it. It would make me feel like everything's okay, secure. And the truth of the matter is it was far from secure. Did that, just continued that path around 81. Up until 05, drinking and doing other substances, but it got really bad. You know, I don't think my story's a whole lot different than anybody else's. You know, it just boils down to a lot of misery, a lot of pain, and then getting help. Now, I can tell you about jumping off buildings and breaking in homes and all of that stuff. That's what happens when, you know, what alcohol does to me, not for me. You know, I kind of lost the track of what it was doing for me than what it was doing to me. But I think the important thing is the sobriety part, you know. But I started the first treatment center was in 90s. At that time, I was still living in Wilmington. And that's what I would do is when things would get really bad, the bills would get really behind, I would go to treatment. And you know, maybe it was a court case or, you know, got arrested or something like that. And, you know, my family just got tired of bailing my sorry ass out, to be honest about it. I remember my mom when my dad died in 98, sober from Alcoholics Anonymous. My mom, she's sober today from alcohol. She got sober, I don't know, probably in the 80s. I think just the misery and the pain over time is what happened. It's not the loneliness that they talk about in Alcoholics Anonymous that only an alcoholic knows. That's the part that got to me. You know, because I felt sometimes just as content with no money in my pocket as I've ever felt. Nowhere to live. I was good with it. Didn't matter to me. Nothing to drive. I didn't have a job. But it's that part where over time, I don't have a choice in whether I'm drinking or doing other things. You know, I'm consistently looking for it. And that misery and pain on that is like, I want to walk away from it, but I can't do that. You know, as bad as I want to stay sober, you know, I think it's a great idea, but I just don't seem to have the key to unlock that where I can do it. That first treatment center I went to, Walter B. Jones in Greenville, mid-90s or somewhere in the mid-90s. Went there and stayed, I don't know, 30 days, 28 days, whatever it is. I stayed that length of time. Got out, went to my parents. They lived in Eatonton on a Saturday. Saturday night I went out, got high, got drunk over in Elizabeth City. Came in about 2:30. And I thought to myself on the way back to my parents, I'm like, well, it's only 2 o'clock. Like I knew my ass was in trouble. I think every alcoholic gets to a point where inside they say I'm in a lot of trouble. And I don't mean like I got the flu or I'm going to go to jail again. Like something's busting my ass and killing me and I can't stop it. And I know that's what was happening to me. And back down in Wilmington, doing the same thing, you know. And here's the thing about it. I could sit here and tell you about the 5 treatment, the 7 treatment, whatever. The truth is I never was ready to get sober. I didn't have enough yet, you know. I've heard many topics in Alcoholics Anonymous. I relapsed hundreds of times. You know, I picked up 30-something white chips or whatever. The truth is, in all of that, you know, I wasn't trying to get sober for me, probably, and I wasn't ready to get sober. I remember going to the Colony the first time I went there. I don't know what year it was. Went there, had a little apartment at Holden Beach, and I went there and stayed the term there. And they said, "What about a halfway house?" And I'm so arrogant and pompous, you know. I'm like, "No," and go back to where I live at and get drunk and get high. You know, some people can do things I can't do. I know people that are here tonight. They got sober in the town that they grew up in. I can't do it. I travel to Wilmington anywhere from 1 to 4 times a week now. I've never stayed, since I've been sober, I've never stayed one night. I just ain't willing to roll the dice. Maybe I could, maybe I couldn't. I'd rather drive home, spend the gas money, and wake up sober the next day and go back down there. To a lot of people, it really doesn't make a lot of sense. But you know, there's a part inside of me, talks about it in our books. I had to concede to my innermost self I'm an alcoholic. You know, I get that. I'm not willing to take a chance. Not today. Maybe in a year or two I will, or maybe, I don't know. But I've never stayed sober in the town that I used to drink in. So I've never been to Aberdeen, North Carolina. Like I said, went to Colony that time. They said, "What about halfway house?" I'm like, "No, I don't think so." Well, of course, I went back and I got drunk. And my brother, he's a good man. You know, he's a good man today. He's always been a good man. When I was a kid growing up, he was like my dad. He was the guy that, he was solid, the word Julie used. He was like really solid, and I think all of us have those kind of people in our lives, and thank God for them. You know, I'm going to say this about enablers. I used to think enablers were terrible. And I had a conversation with a man on the phone. I mean, as far as a family, they're a pretty solid group of people. The father and the son are different ways to handle a situation, and it's about enablers. And the girl who is the grandfather's granddaughter, and then my friend Chris, it's his niece, father, son, niece. And so Chris, the grandfather called me on the phone. This was at Thanksgiving. He said, "You've talked to our family before." And he said, "Got a little situation here, trying to get your info." And he talked a little bit. And what it was his son didn't want him coming over. Afraid that the niece may cause some problems at Thanksgiving. And he said, "You know, if she doesn't go, my wife's not going to go, and I'm not going to go." And I said, "You want to know if you're right or wrong?" And he said, "Yeah, that's what I want to know." And I said, "You're not wrong for loving the way you love. That's just me." Well, the next day, crazy enough, his son called. Same scenario. You know, he went down through the whole spiel, and I said, "You want to know if you're right or wrong?" And now his son's the polar opposite. His son's like me. Like, "Hell no, you're not coming to my home. I know you. I'm you." And I said, "You want to know if you're right or wrong?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "You're not wrong for loving the way you love." I've learned for me that love don't always come in hugs and kisses. You know, that's just for me. But I believe both are right. You know, thank God for my enabler. I don't know what would have happened. Maybe I'd have got sober before. Maybe I'd have died. I don't know. But I'm glad she was there. You know, that I can say today. The second time I went to another treatment center up in right outside of Raleigh. Stayed there for maybe 28 days. Once again, drank again. So now, you know, I was 42 when I got sober. And I remember when I was 25, and I'm like, you know what? I'll get sober when I'm 30. That's what I'll do. 30 is a good number. And like, I meant that shit. Like I was talking to myself, I'm going to say shit to you. I was 30, got there, and I'm like 35. That's it. Because I couldn't do it. I couldn't commit like a year. Come on, really? No, we got to make it a 5-year deal here. And I'm like, well, 35 is the number. I'll get sober when I'm 35. And 35 got there, and I said 40. And hell, I didn't even say nothing at 40. And then 42 rolls up. You know, I'm like, and it wasn't like at 42 it was my worst year. It wasn't. But there's a God deal that goes on in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm a firm believer of that. And something happened, and I think it was divine intervention. I ended up coming up here to Aberdeen. I remember I went to the colony again. I was nervous, really nervous, because, you know, it was like the 6th, 5th, 7th one. Don't recall exactly, but, you know, I was getting a reprieve, you know, from myself for this time of being in these treatment centers. And I'm that guy. I can't go get drunk or high, or at least my track record hasn't proved it yet. And so, well, you know, I'm going to get back to AA. I'm not laughing about that. I've not been that guy. You know, I normally don't come back to AA for several years if I do get drunk or high or both. So anyway, I went to back to Samaritan Colony, and I was standing out front there, and I was in bad shape. Bad shape physically. We know spiritually and mentally, but physically, I had these moles popping up on me. It was terrible. This is from drinking and drugging, and I was taking this medicine. I was out of it. Yeah, envision that, huh? And so Harold's sitting down there, and I'm trying to tell this guy that works there, you know, about my enabler. She'll do blah, 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 blah. And Harold goes, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, I knew I done messed up. I can tell the way he said it. You know, Harold, you know, this kind of way he said stuff. I said, I said, "I'm sorry, sir." He said, "I don't want to hear your story." He said, "You're full of shit. Looks like you were when you were last time." But he didn't say it so nice and kind like that. Like he was pissed off. And if anybody's ever seen him get mad, he can really blow the top off. And he did, and man, I was scared to death. I knew this guy had nailed me, you know, because I was full of shit. And I sat outside. It was mosquitoes every damn where. I didn't move for an hour and a half. I just sat there. And finally I said, well, probably don't speak to nobody else as long as you're here. It was only my second day there. And I said, just do your chores and mind your business. And if somebody says hello, say hello to them, you know, and don't speak. And that's what I did. About halfway through there, 2 weeks later, Robert came up and he said, yeah, what about a halfway house? I'm like, you know what, I owe a lot of people money. and a lot of money. And I'm like, you know, that's not, absolutely. So he said, well, I said, where's it going to be? He goes, you don't need to know. It don't matter. I'm like, you're right. I agree. So it was here. And so I did what I was supposed to do there. And got a little diploma thing. And they said, okay, you're going to Aberdeen. I'm like, okay. So I did. Came up here to Aberdeen. And I'll never forget, got out of the van. I just slept from there up here, a portion of it. And got my little bag out with the clothes in it, you know. And went inside, and Hugh was there then, and you know, his teeth wasn't in, and he was talking about this, you know. And I love the dude. I mean, he was always good. He was good to me. And he said, "Where you from?" And I told him. He said, "What are you doing?" I told him. He goes, "Oh, you'll be drunk in a week." I'm like, damn, that ain't a confidence builder, you know. He said, we just had one like you drink the other day. I'm like, damn, really? You know, I've this long, probably been sober a long time, 30 days. I'm like, damn, Debbie Downer right off the bat, you know. And he'd been sober for a while. I'm like, he knows what he's talking about. I guess I'm going to get drunk. And, yeah. So, anyway, the deal over at Bethesda, and, you know, I've come to learn that's a privilege. These homes that we have around here, men and women, it's a privilege. I didn't know any of that until I got sober. So you had to go to 4 meetings a week. You had to sign the sheet. And so I started reading that blue book there, that big book, and I didn't know what I was reading. Hell, I've never known what it didn't make heads or tails to me, but I was reading it anyway. And they said, well, you got to get a sponsor. And I got one. Some of you probably remember Jack Q. Was sober a long time. He came here. Good man. And I got him as a sponsor, and they told me that my first week, they said, we want you to work construction. They told me what to do. I'm like, damn, really? I said, okay. All right. I tried. Hey, anybody here hanging sheetrock, you know, over a head, that's a damn job. I couldn't do it. I mean, it was just wearing my ass out. I was 42 years old, foot broke. I'm like, damn, this is heavy. Anyway, yeah, that's a man's job for real. You know, wasn't in good shape. Anyway, so you know, I got a sponsor, I got Jack, and did that job for a couple of weeks or maybe a month. I said, fuck it. I said, I'll tell you what, man, look, if I'm gonna get drunk, I'm gonna get drunk. I don't need no damn job. I can get drunk off $5 or nothing. It don't matter. I mean, we all can. Hell, you know, that ain't good. Here's still some beer. We're good to go. But anyway, so met Jack, got a sponsor, and we weren't doing anything. And Richard, one of my mentors then, we were having a big book study on Thursdays back here in this room. I was probably 3 months sober, including my 30 days down at the colony. Then I came in, I told them, I said, man, I need to talk to somebody. I told them what was going on, and they sat and listened to me. And wasn't like they, you know, laid hands on me or nothing great. You know, I don't remember like, boom, that's what it is, the answer. But I know they listened to me, and I left here that day. And so, but we weren't doing any big book work. You know, I hear people that, it seemed like the people that, over my 12 years of coming to AA and never staying sober, the people that seemed to stay sober were doing like Julie tonight, and the guys that read, and, you know, they were, like the tickets, they were doing some shit here. They weren't like just showing up here, sitting in the back, or sitting up front and not doing anything and leaving, you know, getting here late and leaving early. They were like involved, and I never had been. And so anyway, just remember that, and also at my age you lose your train of thought. You can probably tell that too. But so I came in, they talked to me, and it was sad because I didn't think I was gonna stay sober. Like I never stay sober. I don't know if you're here and you ever feel that way, but you can, and that's what I found out about AA. You know, as a loser, dysfunctional person that I've been in my life, this is the only thing that I've ever done that I feel like I put some work into it. Alcoholics Anonymous. And it has paid off bigger than shit. Really. And so, once again, I wasn't doing anything, and I was sitting in a meeting over here. I was chairing it right here at the end of the table, and a gentleman came in, and he was sitting here where Chris was sitting at, and I'd never seen this guy before. And he shared in the meeting, and when he shared, I knew this guy. I mean, it's just the way he delivered what he was saying, and he made a beeline straight over here. He said, "I hear you're new," and I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "What you getting ready to do?" And I said, "Well, living in the halfway house. I got to be in by, I don't know if it's 10 or 11, but anyway, I had to be in probably by 11 on this Friday night." And his name was Tom, and he's my sponsor today. And he had been living in Fayetteville, going to meetings in Fayetteville, and so he came over and talked. We went to Frankie's Coffee, and we sat there for about 3 hours and drank coffee. And the next Friday night, same thing. I'm there, he's there, he comes over, coffee. Yeah, we got to do that again. And on that third one, man, I broke down in tears, and I said, "Man, I need a sponsor." He said, "Well, I thought you had one." I said, "Well, I do, man." But I said, "But I ain't never done no step work." I said, "We ain't doing nothing." I said, "You know, he's playing golf, and I'm going to AA, and he's going to AA too." I said, "But, I mean, I'm getting ready to drink, man. Like, I know." And I said, "Would you sponsor me?" And he said, "I tell you what," he said, "you go to that man and tell him thank you. You tell him thank you for everything he's done, and then you come back." And I'm like, "Damn, if I do that." And he says, "No, I'm in a lot of trouble." At least I got Jack to talk to, you know. And but I did. I'm like, "Well, shit, I better do it." And I did, and I came to him like the next 2 nights later. He was at the meeting, and I said, "I did what you said, sir." And I said, "Will you be my sponsor?" And then he gave me the 2 questions that we ask people, and I'm sure most everyone else does. You know, you willing to go to any length for victory over alcohol, and you're really lit this time. And he said, "Don't answer them now." He said, "But let me know tomorrow." And I've never followed directions, so I'm terrible at that shit. Like, you tell me something, I'm like, "Oh, I got it. I ain't got it, I promise you." And like, you'd be looking me in the damn face and telling me shit, and I'd be like, saying it back some other way. But did you not hear what I said? "Oh yeah, I heard exactly what you said." Anyway, so Tom became a sponsor, and those 2 days went by. I saw him. I said, "The answer is yes," and that's where the recovery for me started. And he said it'd be a privilege to be your sponsor. We sat at this table right here, and he started to say some things that began to make sense to me. He said, just so you know, this is not a spiritual program of attendance. He said it's a spiritual program of action. And I'm like, damn, that makes sense, because I ain't never done nothing. And I've attended a bunch of damn meetings. Yeah. And he wasn't laughing or joking. And he said, also, because see, he had listened those 3 weeks, he had listened those 9 hours of talking, he was listening. I found that to be a damn skill, because I don't listen real well. And he said, every alcoholic's got what it takes to stay sober. He said, you do. I said, and boy, I'm not them ears perked up then. I'm like, really? He said, yeah. He said, do you remember when you told me about you walked like in 30-something degree weather with a broke foot, 4 miles to that liquor house at 2:30 in the morning? I'm like, oh yeah. He said, you remember that time you did whatever you did? He repeated it back to him like, yeah. And he told me a couple other things I'd done that he had listened to, and I said, yes, sir. He said, Frank, that's called willingness. He said, it's just been misdirected. We just get some things to do here. And it just began to make a little sense, that's all. You know. And so we would meet and we would read. And, Keith, my grand sponsor, which was Tom's sponsor at the time, we'd sit over on these tables at night on Friday nights. Man, it was different back then. I guess I was more applicable at that time. But we'd set it here to meetings be over on Friday night. We'd have that table full of guys till 10, 11, maybe 12. They'd whittle on down to maybe 1 o'clock, be 2 or 3 of us here. That happened often. But we would sit and read, and I remember one time, and I've said this many a times, but I was at his house, and we would do most of our step work at his house, and he had the 3rd edition book, a little smaller book. Mine's the bigger book, and I'm like, man, he's got a smaller book. I better not say nothing about that book. But I kept looking at it, and he caught me looking. He goes, what are you looking at? I said, I'm looking at nothing, sir. Still lying like hell, you know. He said, no, what are you looking at? And I said, nothing, sir. He goes, you looked at my book. You was looking at the book. I went, yeah, you're right, I was looking at the book. He said, you don't need to look at this book. He said, this is the book with all the answers in it. I went, damn. You know. And see, that's the fun in AA, you know. I mean, I got problems. I'm here to tell you, it's all up in between my ears. You know, it's my brain. It's my brain. I was at a meeting at Low Bottom in Monroe several years back, and a guy was reading the traditions, and the third one there said the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop. He said thinking. I went, damn, that's what it is. It says drinking, but it's the thinking, and that's what it really is to me. It's, you know, the issues I have are mental. They're in my brain. You know, I never really liked to accept that stuff that, you know, I had mental problems, but that shit is current. They didn't send me to mental health because they thought it was like a joking idea. Like, I need help. And, you know, once I started to get help, it got a little bit better, I became a little more tolerable with myself. But we started doing step work, and we started reading from the cover of the book all the way back through the first 103 to recovery pages, and then first 164. And I'll never forget that first page in there. When you open it up, there ain't nothing there. It's just blank. He said, what do you see? I said, I don't see nothing. He said, well, that's what you know about staying sober. And he wasn't laughing, and it wasn't funny, and it was just the truth. And in AA, that's what I found out. It's really just about the truth. You know, it isn't whether I'm white or black, or fat or skinny, or young or old. It's just if I follow that print, the experience is going to unfold in front of me. If I think and it turns into an obsession, and then I pour it down my throat and succumb to that desire, and something happens to me that don't happen to people that are not alcoholic, called non-alcoholic, and that allergic reaction occurs and the phenomenon of craving occurs, I got a problem. And it's called untreated alcoholism. You know, the drink always happens way before the drink with me. So we started, you know, in the print of the book there, and we went on through, and that part I was just talking about, we got to the doctor's opinion. And he said, I don't need to hear your opinions in AA. Because, I mean, I got some damn opinions, and I'll tell you. He said, there's only one opinion in Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, that's the doctor's opinion. He said, what we want here is your experience. He said, don't need to hear your opinions. And so it's just little teaching things along the way that kind of helped me. I know I came to a meeting one time, my grand sponsor, I was there a little bit late, and probably 20 minutes into it, I shared, and after the meeting, he said, come in, I want to talk to you. He said, you told me you played baseball when you were little, didn't you? I said, yeah, I did. He said, you told me there was a time you didn't show up for practice, like 3 or 4 days in a row. I said, yeah, you're right. He said, when it came game time, did you get to play? I said, well, I didn't start. He said, did you go in later? I said, yeah, I went in later. He said, that's the way it is here. He said, all them people got here before you. At the end of the meeting, if you want to share, that's okay, but you don't do that. Well, yes, sir. I mean, things begin to make a little sense for me in the sponsorship line that I'm in. Whatever your sponsors got you doing, I think they're right. But the group of guys I'm with, I'm glad I got them. They've always been fair but firm, and they've been very good mentors along the way. Their example that they've led through their actions, I hope one day I'm able to live exactly the way they live. But the process of getting sober, I had a real issue with this higher power. And when I say I had an issue with it, if I can't see it, smell it, feel it, or touch it, it ain't there. I don't know what you call that, but that was me. AA calls it something like we agnostics. And the way it was explained to me, agnostic says there's no proof there's a higher power. Atheist says there ain't one. So, there is that chapter. And before we got there, he said, I want you to write on a sheet of paper and this ain't in the big book, by the way. He said, I want you to write on a sheet of paper what you've always heard God was. Like when I was a kid growing up from my grandparents and everyone else. He said, on another sheet of paper, write what God is to you. And I did. And I came to him, so right before we started reading We Agnostics, he says, where's your sheet of paper on what God is to you? I said, right here. He said, do you remember when we read a while back when Evie said to Bill? He said, Bill, your own conception. You come up with your own conception. He said, we're going to do what Evie and Bill did. And if I go back and I read that, that makes sense to me. And he said, here's what I want you to do. Take that list that you have there, and I want you to pray to become those things. And I said, yes, sir. So I threw the other list away. He said, that's your higher power. That ain't nobody else's. You wrote it down. I said, yes, sir. And so as time went by, this higher power thing, it proved itself to me. I'll just say it like that. AA proved itself to me. The process in Alcoholics Anonymous is probably the most valuable process I've ever had, bar none. And the reason for that is it allows me to stay sober, but it also allows me to share my experience, strength, and hope with other people in AA. Here's the crazy thing, that it's like life comes full circle. Those nights that I was, or for years, decades, that I was walking those dope houses, liquor houses, 3, 4 in the morning, renting cars out, some just don't never come back, worried to death, all those crazy experiences, jumping through, windows of homes that I don't live there, stealing shit from people. The way that we live, it is the most valuable asset I have today. If you look at liabilities and assets, it's normally about money. You take what your bills are, take the income, subtract the two, and there's what's left over. Hopefully I can save some of that. But in AA, what I found out is my assets or my experiences that I can share with another human being. That'll hopefully one day maybe, let them see that AA works. Like if it can get a drunk like me sober, then maybe it can get a drunk like them sober too. I don't normally learn from people who get it right. I have to go through getting it wrong. And so with the higher power thing, it was all about faith. It was all about doing what was asked of me to do, the surrender position, writing those gratitude lists and coming to meetings, praying on my knees. I asked Tom, I said, why I got to get on my knees? He said, Frank, it's called a higher power. He said, you don't look the higher power eye to eye. He said, you're on your knees. It's a surrender position. Just things that made sense. Not rocket science shit. Just something like a fifth grader would go, yeah, that makes sense. And so, when I surrender to this deal in AA, it seems like my life gets better. It always has seemed that way. This is the only thing I've ever really tried that has paid off in dividends over the years. And I'm going to just finish up real quick with a little story that I always do. It's just been my experience in AA. Man's an alcoholic. His son is wants him to throw ball. He comes up to his dad, "Can we throw ball?" Man's drinking. He said, "No, son. Come back later. We'll throw ball." Little boy comes back. His dad says, "Can we throw ball now?" And his dad sees a picture on a newspaper of the world. So he tears it up in a bunch of pieces and throws it on the floor. And the little boy, he says, "Son, when you put that back together, we'll throw ball." And little boy gets down there, and to the man's amazement, he put it back together. "Here you go, Daddy." And the father looked at the little boy, and he said, "Son, how did you do that?" And the little boy replied, "Daddy, on the other side was a picture of a man. And the moral of the story is that when God puts the man back together, the world will come." And that's been my experience here. Thanks for letting me share.